Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to talk about history or our perceived understandings of it. Interesting thing. So many people are fascinated with history. So many people are fascinated with our perceived understandings of history. It's a very important thing that we really don't give a lot of thought to quite often. And that is that for most of us, when we think of our history, and I'm not talking about like in an academic setting or a educational setting, I'm just talking about basically sitting at home, relaxing and thinking. And we all happen to do that now and then, whatever is the topic that we like. Some people are into baseball and sports or whatever, or football or soccer or performing arts or whatever, but we all have our fantasies or our perceived understandings of what those worlds are like. And when we get to history, there is some very important things to think of. Now, while I'm speaking to you, it's quite cold here, I must tell you. Here in the New York metropolitan area, it's cold. It's going to snow tonight. The temperature's going to plummet. Now, this is a problem because the temperature right now is about 12 degrees Fahrenheit, which I guess is like minus 16 Celsius, which falls into the category of damn cold. And it's going to plummet. And it's going to go down to zero or a little bit below zero. And I'm not looking forward to that at all. But you know something? I can fantasize about a warmer clime. You know, the thing is that history, quite often, and our understandings of history and the history of recording, the history of this, that, and everything else, we have what's called filtered history. And what do I mean by this? I mean very much when we think of history, a lot of times we automatically filter out all of the things in history that we find disagreeable. You know, if indeed I had the opportunity somehow to go back to the year 1900, my perceptions of 1900 will be through my filtered understandings of it. To actually live in 1900 and experience everything would be a very, very different affair, and would certainly make one say, perhaps this wasn't the good old days. Because we have a habit of saying that. It's not like the good old days. Well, the good old days had good points to them, but they had a lot of bad, too. Think about how awful it was in 1900. Just think of sanitation. Think of healthcare. You know, think about the common cold could kill you. No penicillin, no antibiotics. Think about a home entertainment system. It was your mother at a piano. Of course, you had rudimentary recording. Motion pictures were short little things. And probably Aunt Gladys was playing piano. That was the musical background in the theater. But food wasn't very good. Standards weren't very good. Transportation was not too bad. Think of race relations. Think of how people were treated. You know, think of Jim Crow and think of all of the terrible things that were being done to Native Americans. And think if you were Italian, how people would treat you. Or if you were Irish, how people would treat you. You know, it was a very, very different world. And it wasn't a very pretty world. But in our fantasy, in our understandings, in our filtered history, it was the good old days. So we do have that little bit of tendency to go in that direction. You know, I'm reminded of Henry Ford. He created what was called Greenfield Village in Michigan. Henry Ford was a strange individual, smart in many respects, very anti-Semitic. But also, one thing he hated were bankers and lawyers. And I know he wasn't alone there. There's a lot of people who probably felt similar. But the thing is, when he created Greenfield Village, which was this historic site that you could go back and relive history, it was his filtered history, his utopia, where there were no banks and where there were no lawyers. And so we look at things in a very, very unique thing. Look at reenactors. Look at people who like to dress up in period clothes, go to have parties, or people who collect things, people who get very much immersed in certain things. I mean, it's just like Star Wars and Star Trek, and people get dressed up, and I guess lots of other things like this. And as time goes on, it becomes a little bit more historic, and it's in a sense historic recreating of an event that wasn't an event at all. It was just a movie. But still, think about all this stuff. Another thing just to mention, and that is, when I was a kid, I in my teens and 20s, I used to go to the Englewood Actors Home in Englewood, New Jersey. And that's where a lot of old vaudevillians spent their twilight years. And I got to know Joe Smith there, who was with the Avon Comedy 4, and also was with Smith and Dale, a comedy routine. And they had been performing since the late 1890s. And I used to sit there and talk with him, and he was in his 90s at this point. And he was gracious enough, and I would do the routine with him. Dr. Krankheit, I've got a headache, and it hurts when I do this. Well, don't do this. It was fun. I might have annoyed the hell out of him, but he certainly gave a lot of joy to a young kid. But another person that was there, and I talked to a lot of folks there, one of them was George M. Cohan's daughter. She was interesting. We talked about her father and her career, and we talked about her father's bizarre eating habits, which were kind of strange. Also, we talked about the movie Yankee Doodle Dandy, which the George M. Cohan story, starring Jimmy Cagney. A lot of people think that Jimmy Cagney is George M. Cohan, by this point. But she said something very interesting about the movie. And she said that movie was the life Father wanted to live. It was filtered history. And so, ladies and gentlemen, it's neat and fun to think about history. It's fun to share thoughts and get dressed up and experience history. But to think that that's actually history truly isn't the case. What we perceive in our filtered history is our fantasy of what history was. In fact, we have a fantasy of a time that never truly existed. But that's okay, because in this world where things are crazy and technology is moving so fast and the internet is affecting everything, and there's unrest in many countries and political unrest in so many different areas and so many different countries, sometimes it's nice to take a step backwards and visit a world that's all your own. We all have our little area of historic fantasy, or whatever the topic may be, where we can step away from reality for a few moments and visit the past. But the most important thing to remember always, that the past as we perceive it is quite often not what truly existed. But still it gives great comfort. So enjoy it, and always remember to have fun with history. Enjoy it, learn from it, and filter it as you like. Thank you.